On this episode of LightCast, we talk to Edward Clark and Marty Brennan of ZGF Architects about how to create circadian-friendly lighting, what it takes to implement daylighting strategies, artificial lighting, and move the industry forward.
The network for the AV industry.
What are you listening to?
This
is AV.
This
is AVNation.
This is AVNation.
This is LightCast, episode 10, Circadian Friendly Lighting, recorded December 10th, 2016.
This is LightCast.
Welcome, everyone, to another edition of LightCast. I am your host, JP Bedell, with my co-host, Megan Mazzocco. Hey, Megan.
Hi, JP. How's it going?
Very well. We have our guests today are Edward Clark and Marty Brennan from ZGF Architects. Edward is a design analyst who specializes in the implementation of high-performance building standards. He's got a master's in architecture from the University of Oregon. He was a graduate research fellow in the Energy Studies in Building Lab. And, overall smart guy, Bachelor of Science from UC Davis. Megan, what's our background on Marty?
Marty Brennan is a project architect and daylighting specialist at ZGF, and he's a graduate of the University of Washington with his master's degree of architecture and a certificate in lighting. In his past experience, he's established methodologies in computational daylighting at SOM, investigating visual comfort, daylight harvesting, and electric lighting integration. And currently, he's co-developing a circadian light imaging application.
Excellent. Okay, Marty and Edward, thank you so much for joining us here on LightCast.
It's our pleasure. Thank you.
Good to be here.
So we've talked about circadian rhythm a little bit before on the show. So we have our audience has a little bit of background in this, but I'd love to start at really like a high level and talk about just definitionally what circadian rhythm is and why it's important to health.
Sure. Well, so we've found ourselves in a bit of a disconnect with where we came from, is my perspective. So we evolved in a certain environment, and now we live in a somewhat novel environment. And the pace of development of human technology is much more rapid than our ability to change as a species or an organism. So we found ourselves in this disconnect between where we evolved and the needs of those related environments to where we are currently. And some spaces do it really well, some not so well. But the big takeaway is that we understand this quite well, and that through electric lighting solutions and really good daylighting design, we can rectify that disconnect. You want to talk about circadian rhythms in general?
Yeah, I guess we know now there's lots of evidence that human beings need day and night cycles to kind of set their circadian clock. And this occurs roughly on a 24-hour cycle. And so from a historical standpoint, we had daylight that we woke up at dawn, had a good boost of blue light. And then towards evening, that light waned, and we would have, say, maybe firelight or candlelight, warmer light sources, and ultimately darkness to sleep to. So this kind of cyclical day and night is part of our evolution, and it's part of our biology. So we want to, I think, as architects, be able to support those rhythms in our environments, whether you're in an airport, a school, a hospital, at home. And so like Ed was saying, the technology today, we have a lot of lighting that we're getting a lot more lighting at night and not enough lighting during the day, because most people spend most of their time indoors. And a lot of times it's underlit, or you're not getting blue enough light. And daylight is exceptionally blue, but a lot of electric light scenes are pretty warm. So it's a total disconnect.
So I guess the first question would be, is this an an electric light issue from your point of view, or is this an exposure to daylight issue from a design perspective?
It's a little bit of both, because if you do, take that one for now, and I'll switch out with you. If you don't have the proper daylight illumination levels for whatever reason, it could be sensitivities to program, it could be depth of floor plate, it could just be latitude, where you are in the world. It could be your office is located on the north side of the building, so you get this wonderful, nice, soft light, and you could be, say, 40 feet from the window. So there's all these kind of influences that could say you're not getting the light you really could or should based upon the natural cycle. So that's where you can supplement with the electric lighting sources.
So we did an experiment with the Lighting Research Center at Troy, New York, where we wore dosimeters, and it's a little piece of jewelry that you hang around your neck, and it's
jewelry.
Yeah, we looked a little odd. It was an interesting experiment. We wore them each for a week, and what it does is it's measuring the light that you're receiving every minute, and when you sleep, you set it by you, and it's actually measured your movement as well. So it had a little accelerometer, so it's cross-referencing daylight or any light source, electric or daylight, and movement. And we kept a sleep log. And this is something the Lighting Research Center does. And it was fascinating to see how different our profiles were. Ed at the time was sitting with close to this view that we're in now, with view to the south in great daylight. And myself, I had electric light only, more interior to the building. And it really had a big impact on our circadian rhythms. And they were able to kind of show that quantitatively.
And so one thing to note is, going back to the circadian rhythm, is our body clock runs usually greater than 24 hours a day. And so that reset of light has an impact, especially when you get it at the right time in the mornings. So the more you right yourself with that light exposure, the more in tune you are to local environment. So we're looking at these fairly technical mechanisms to tie us back to the natural world, which is somewhat ironic. Mm-hmm. That experiment showed that I got 100-foot candles at a time easily in my location, and Marty was less than 25, maybe even less, because you're measuring at the eye instead of at the horizontal. So most lighting is designed for this illumination level on the task rather than at your eye. So there's a discrepancy between that ratio. So it could be a 1 to 3, it could be 50% of what you get on your desk is going to get in your eye. So it ends up being these kind of layering of physiology and access to light. And then, is there even enough light in space when you're going towards that electric solution, when you're just looking at the old paradigm of light on the task?
Right. So that's a fundamental shift in how we would think about lighting workspaces or healthcare spaces, really. Because, as you're saying, the IES and really common lighting practice for the last 50, 60 years has been to think about task illumination, compared to ambient, with a focus on the task. So the thought, I guess, would be, if we're talking about electric light, how do you generate, 50 to 100-foot candles at eye level without creating just a glare situation that's just not pleasant? Or, that strikes me as a difficult design challenge.
It is, yeah. I think it's something that we do all the time with daylighting. Mm-hmm. We take it for granted that, we're as architects, we're constantly designing space with windows, right? Nobody is going to accept a space without a view to the world and bringing daylight and skylight into a space. And what we're doing is creating vertical planes of illuminance, right? That is bringing full spectrum light into the space at very, high intensities at some times. There's kind of that to work with. But then from an electric standpoint, we certainly have our devices. So, light coming from your computer screen is contributing to your circadian rhythm. And we talk more and more about lighting at your desk. So more task lighting that is actually vertical illuminated surfaces to get that boost early in the morning. And we've also talked about ways to use different program spaces in a building, like around the coffee, in the break rooms, to have vertical illuminated surfaces that people will more likely accept just higher illuminated spaces, because the contrast comes down to the context of the lighting. You can up the lighting if you're upping everything.
And the other thing that we've been considering is Marty just mentioned that idea of this kind of place you retreat to. We call it kind of a lighting oasis or a lumen shower, where it really is a place you can go to get that boost, but there's really no substitute for just kind of taking a walk outside, right? So if you commute in the tunnel, if you jump on your train, you don't spend any time outside, then you're really doing yourself a bit of harm, and you have to kind of make up for it when you get to the workplace. So we found a while ago that you spend way too much time indoors, and a lot of that time at work. Even if you like your job, it's still too much time at work. But the reality is that's an opportunity then, right? If you're there during those morning hours, there's a real chance you can make a difference through a lighting solution. And then not all light distributions are the same. So if, as most folks are aware, like the down light is not going to distribute as much light within the space as like a direct indirect pendant might. And so the more you have in the light bounce around the space, the more that's going to get into your eye. And so it becomes then, how do you look at the distribution of the light source, the illumination level of the light source, and the color temperature of the light source to give the light you need. The other thing, as opposed to glare, some fixtures can be bright without creating a lot of glare, depending on how the surface is and what your view is relative to that light source.
So are we talking about luminous planes here? Is that what we're really talking about? We're talking about lighting the ceiling, lighting the walls, making the environment luminous to avoid that problem? Because that seems to be like my lighting design thought here is that you want to get away from direct view light sources. You want to get more toward surface illumination, right? If you can bounce 20-foot candles off each wall, you're in a better position than if you're trying to blast the desk with 100-foot candles. Is that a fair statement, or what do you think?
Yeah, I think overall that's true, but there will be cases where you will need a boost that will be literally a vertical plane of illuminance that isn't necessarily reflected. It might be a source. So windows, in a sense, are a source of light because they're seeing the sky. And, nobody wants to look at the direct sun, but we are always looking at the sky. And the sky, in essence, it is a giant reflected surface. And it's quite a bit of light that's coming off of it. So, yeah, the more that we can match that, supplement that electrically on surfaces in a space, that's going to reduce the contrast. It's going to increase the vertical light at your eye. But I think there are opportunities with devices and local planes of light at your task that might only be for an hour in the morning, right? Because a lot of this is dynamic. There's products on the market that your iPhone and different devices can modulate the intensity, the color based on time of day. So similar, we could modulate intensity.
Sure. Do you think that the science is at a place now where we know what the right programming is, what the right color temperature intensity mix is for the right results? Or this came up in a conversation I had recently with some healthcare designers. They were interested in tunable light, they were interested in circadian rhythm, and they said, well, do we know what the science really says? Like, what should we be implementing as a strategy? Do we know what that is right now?
I think it's much more well understood than folks care to consider right now. There's a couple sticky points in that practitioners rarely go to first tier research. So they wait for the rep to come in and show them the piece of information, or they wait for it to be published in some sort of trade journal. And if you review the first tier research associated with all this, it points to very specific responses. And I think the science is there, the timing is there. There's a little bit of concern about how long durational, but we know it's not really a concern, it's just some ambiguity. We know if you get the light in the morning, it's going to shift your clock into a positive way and it's going to right you for local time. And we know if you get that light, the blue content, high intensity light towards the evening, it's going to adjust your clock in a way it's going to impede or influence the way you're going to sleep at night. Going back to daylight and variability, it's a very interesting thing. I had a conversation like you had just recently where that was the exact question. And then we never asked the question, is a ubiquitous illumination level at 3,500 foot candles appropriate for health and well-being in any environment, which is what we've been living at for the past however long, right? That was never a consideration. So now we've got this opportunity through technology to make choices in how we deliver light. And honestly, we're never going to deliver light at a degree or at an illumination level anywhere near of what's outside our window. And most of us would honestly prefer a daylit environment. I've also seen folks get very excited about this idea of additional blue light causing retinal damage. It's like that might be a blue laser. It's you don't go outside and worry about that type of thing when you're in 1,000 foot candles of sunlight, right? So then all of a sudden we've got this choice associated with what we can do within our space that isn't a 3,500 foot candle evenly illuminated concept. And then because we have choice, we tend to scrutinize that choice in a way that I think is a little bit overzealous, and recognizing that we know what the sun does, we know what our body does, we know the response that our body has to spectral intensity, and we can design towards that. And if we follow, I believe, as nature as a guide, then we're in the beyond the do no harm. We're providing an environment that's somewhat enriched compared to where we've been for the last 30 years.
Yeah, and I would just add, if you want, to take, Dr. Brainerd, who's one of the pioneers in measuring physiological response to light and looking at melatonin suppression, he's come up with his own recipe for light intensity and color for NASA astronauts, right? So right before an astronaut goes on a spacewalk, he has a very prescribed, 6,500 Kelvin at a certain intensity, whether it's 200 lux. It's a healthy dose of light, but in respect to daylight, it doesn't even come close to daylight. What you might get 50, it might be 50,000 CCT, Kelvin from daylight. It can range up to 100,000 Kelvin. So when we're talking 6,500 Kelvin, it's actually it's a magnitude under what daylight achieves. So Brainerd is a very conservative scientist, and when you take that kind of approach, because nobody wants to just say without a doubt, like it needs to be this temperature at this time at this intensity. I think what we're getting at is the burden of proof isn't on saying variability isn't correct. It's that being, just a consistent CCT and a consistent intensity. Who said that was?
Oh, I don't think that's the debate. I mean, I certainly wouldn't frame it that way. I wouldn't frame it as the right way to do it is deliver 40-foot candles to the work plane and walk away, and dynamic lighting is a different way, or is not the right way because it's not perfect. I think that's making the perfect the enemy of the good. I think the question I think that comes up from designers is once you introduce a whole new set of choices, the question, you run up to other sets of competing priorities, right? So I could very well see a designer or an LD or somebody coming back to me and saying, the idea of me working in 6,500 Kelvin lighting is horrific to me. I prefer warmer color temperatures. That's what I like to work in.
Right.
And so there is once we open that can of like sort of this is what we can do with white light, you start to introduce all these other design variables that I think can complicate things for people. I only say that because even trying to get basic dimming systems into some of these office spaces, people freak out, right? It's like, I just want to be able to turn the lights on, like they don't even want to think about it, So that's where I'm sort of trying to. If we have a set of standards that we can point to, and it sounds like we do, that we can sort of say, listen, we know this works. How do we implement it in a smart way? I think end users will come aboard for that. It's just a matter of sort of bringing them to the water, so to speak.
I would say that finding solutions for the 9 to 5 average working stiff is very straightforward based upon a ton of research that's out there. And the time that you spend in the 6,500 color temperature range is relatively fleeting relative to the overall day. So it could be a couple hours, and it's going to revert back to normal lighting, right? 4,000 or 3,500 or 3, whatever your preference is. And we've also gone the route of Well, we fully recognize that complicated lighting control system is the evil of a decent implementation, right? You can put the greatest system in there. If there's a little bit of complication, users are not going to use it the way that's intended. And so what we've been doing in the couple projects is we have the color temperature track via time clock, and users don't control that at all, because what if they put it at 6,500 at 7 o'clock at night and their neighbor's working late and they have to get up early? There's too many consequences. So we let that free run based on a time clock, and then you control illumination level at your work plane or wherever that switch is. And so there's been this compromise between providing control, which we all want control in our space, right? But then limiting the control to what's really going to be what matter most. Research has also illustrated that your eye adapts very well to the variation of color temperature, and it'll perceive 3,500 and 6,500 as white if the transition between those scenes is not dramatic, right? If it's not a rapid change, if it's not a disco kind of deal, the change of that color temperature won't be that perceptible, and your mind adjusts and makes up for that. And so I think a lot of, just like with sustainable strategies in buildings, a lot of it comes down to your expectations of what that space should be, and being somewhat reluctant to change those expectations, which is human by nature. And we even have that up in our office here. We have daylight dimming, and depending upon, on 2 floors, they're different vintages, and depending upon the vintage of the occupant, they more or less appreciate the dimming. So an occupant of a older vintage might say, I want a very even illumination on the ceiling plane. I don't want to have to turn the lights on when I come into the space. I don't want the variation. You get someone fresh out of school, that's the expectation they have, is for variation within the space and to daylight dim, because that's the ethos that they grew up with. And so we're at this interesting time where expectations are being clung on to by the older vintages and are not meeting some of the expectations of the younger folks. And in the middle, we're trying to provide control and have variability be at their fingertips, but not full control of what that might be.
Sure. One other piece of this, since we're talking about high levels of illumination, have you guys run into any issues? I mean, I don't know what your targets are as far as the high end of light output to to a space, but we're seeing on the West Coast, and then increasingly, I'm in New York, so increasingly in New York City, a tightening of energy code, tightening of lumens per or LPD, and so your lighting power density, and so. Are you running into a situation where you might prefer at certain times of the day, say first thing in the morning from 7 a.m. to 10 a.m., I don't know the right answer, but where in that window you might be over your code or you might be right up against code? Because, I mean, in the LED world, even at 0.9 watts a square foot or half a watt a square foot, you're usually going to be pretty well within it if you're using LED fixtures. But if you're asking to do double the illuminance, you might bump right up against that, or it'll be real close. Have you had that challenge? Or
I think there's kind of a dead band in code right now. They haven't fully caught up to the efficiencies that are available on LED fixtures. And so there's this time now where you can increase connected lighted load without seeing a penalty to energy code. So you can meet those levels. And then overall, operationally, because you're dimming somewhat aggressively later on in the day, it's kind of a wash from an operational kind of energy standpoint. And the connected load, I'm hoping that efficiencies increase as the code increases. And there might even be some sort of mechanisms that you could apply a health-centric lighting solution and get some sort of code allowance if we get to that point. I believe there'll be a balance, hopefully, at some point where you say the need of the occupant might be made up somewhere else in the building from an energy perspective if you can provide these things. So we get like increased floor-to-floor rate for increased daylight and things like that in our codes, but it's not ubiquitous across the country for sure.
If I could wave a wand, or if I could redo how this was done, I would enforce energy code not by a set of drawings. I would enforce energy code by live monitoring what your lighting loads are during, like, you should get a notification when you're over your limit. Like, that's what should happen. You should run your fixtures. You should, I came from the theatrical world where you may have 500 lighting fixtures in the arena, but 2 of them are on at a given time. right? So they're all meant to do different effects at different moments. So it's not that you're burning, this massive amount of energy at once. And that is where we need to move with architectural lighting. You should be able to do 8 or 9 different things in a space and not be penalized for it, because when you run comm check, you're over your lighting power density. That's insane to me.
It is.
And we'll get there, I think, because all of the control systems are moving to cloud-based things where, BMS systems are easily connected. So once we move the cities and municipalities toward being able to actually access that data in real time, we can really start to get there. But we're not there yet. I hope we are. We get there sooner rather than later, because it seems infinitely possible.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, DMX has finally permeated the lighting industry, right? For years, that protocol was not even considered, and finally it's shown up. So
which is, sorry?
DMX, right? Like,
well, DMX has been around since the 80s, and DMX
in architectural lighting was not that common, though, right? In theatrical lighting, it was there, and it's the go-to, right? ETC and DMX is just what a lot of those products kind of are based upon. And we're starting to have conversations with lighting designers or lighting reps where they're even proposing a DMX protocol for controls, which for me is a nice step to a bunch of variability that's going to come in the future.
Well, not that this is the focus of the conversation, but on the DMX thing, the biggest downfall to DMX is that it's always been one-way communication, right? You're spitting code at the device.
That's right.
DMX RDM is sort of a software workaround to that, where the devices can talk back, and that's going to improve that classic problem. But we also see companies like Enlighted and Encelium that are speaking over other protocols, being able to give you data back and forth to the fixture. It's a problem that will get solved. It's amazing to me, because on the theatrical side, the theatrical designers want to get rid of DMX. They feel like it's a protocol that's outlived its usefulness, because you're talking about video data and huge amounts of code that want to get through these wires, and DMX was built for static dimming, so it just feels ancient. So it's just interesting to me, like what's new in the architectural side, and when like the entertainment guys are like, yeah, we've moved on, we send this over like Cat5 and video cable now, like that's it's
your light pipe or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. So talk to me a little bit about because I know we're getting close to our time limit here. Talk to me a little bit about where you see best practices going and how you want to encourage best practices across the industry.
Well, I guess both of us come from a daylighting background, and we kind of start there, which I think daylighting as an architect is the number one priority that we see, and really it's like you're saying, we are up against this wall of getting that vertical illuminance to people with electric solutions. I think there's a lot of opportunities, a lot of being creative, but daylight more or less gets you there right away, as long as you're taking care of glare. You have good controls at the facade, good glazing that's allowing the full spectrum in, not putting super green glass on your building or. So I think that's where we start, is holistically understanding our site, the climate, where we are, what the sky conditions are. Is it Dubai where it's super sunny? Is it Seattle where it's very overcast? It's very different daylighting medicine, how we design. And then really from there, supplementing with electric light, understanding how to, working with some of these technology companies out in Seattle. They're very aggressive about daylight for programmers, and have a lot of our clients actually have their own guidelines where we're just by default do LED lighting that's daylight controlled dimming, and that's the priority, is to put all the programmers at the perimeter of the building, right, and have all your kind of accessory core function in the middle of the building. So there's that whole kind of due diligence of doing your daylight study, making sure your facade, your envelope is all there. And then really, we strive to have materiality and finishes in the building that reflect light. We try to maximize indirect luminous surfaces. so that the electric and the daylight work together, wash surfaces, high reflectances up high, and then getting down lower, gradating that, and then really working with the electric lighting consultants and the engineers to really integrate the two, and working with the manufacturers more and more. That's what Ed's been doing.
And the one thing that we didn't talk about yet is the people, right? You have to understand where the people are, what they need, what their schedules are, because the Googler who shows up at noon and leaves at 8 p.m. might have a different need than somebody else. Night shift work. Are they a patient in a bed? What's their view shed? So for us, we start with the people, right? We understand our people as best we possibly can. And then from there, you look at our built environment and our context. Then at the very end, you start saying, this is the stimulus we're going to give or provide, whether it be electric or daylight. And once you kind of work through it like any other design problem, right? If you're a good designer, you're going to start with your people and what do they actually need and how am I going to fulfill the needs to create a better environment for folks. And that's the prime directive, right? Is to create these nurturing spaces, leverage that are somewhat personal for the occupants. Mm-hmm. And you need to go there first, and then the rest kind of follows in. And there's a lot of smart people out there who can really aid in the conversation, whether it be manufacturers. Some reps are getting much better, but we have seen this idea called blue washing, and I just made that up, where you show up. I didn't just make it up now, I made it up before. But the idea that they're going to show up, the rep's going to show up and is going to say, blue light is going to solve your everything, right? They're not going to give you the context of when. They're not going to give you a context of dose. They're just going to say, I got this tunable fixture. It's the cat's meow, and it's going to change your world, and your occupants are going to be so much more productive unless they can't sleep at night because you gave them 65K at 50-foot candles before they walked out the door. And so there's this point where skepticism is good, and you seek out those who have the knowledge. Most folks are willing to help.
Listen, Los Angeles, New York City adopted LED streetlight. New York for their highways. LA did certain sections. Rushed to market with it because they were looking for the energy savings, and it's all 6,500K. And they've already started to see complaints in certain areas of the cities because you've got this blue light shooting through people's windows in the middle of the middle of the night. And so dark sky catches up. They say we recommend, below 3,000K or lower in terms of color temperature and intensities that vary over the night. And now everyone feels like, and now all the manufacturers rush to catch up, right? Which is what they should be doing.
And the AMA in June.
Yeah, that's right. And the AMA made their statement, right? That's right. Over the summer. So this is it's an interesting, I take your point about sales guys to heart. I think it's something that the talking points are easy to mimic. It's easy to say that, and this is true about LED sort of across the board, right? Like we do this with every new lighting technology. When I say this all the time, but when CFL hit the market, it was like, it's so much more energy efficient. You're going to cut your energy bill in half. And people were like, okay, I'll go buy CFLs. And then they were green and they were flickery and they were crappy and everyone hated them. And horrible. And even if you weren't a lighting person, you knew they were awful, right? That's the most stark example. But we do this in subtle ways across the industry all the time, and it's very hard for people to who don't swim in this stuff every day to discern the two.
That's right. We are at an interesting point, right, where the manufacturers actually have pretty fantastic products that are coming out, high quality light rendering, very good spatial experience from these lights. Control systems are there, right? They could be simple. They can do everything you want. But there's this kind of disconnect between practitioners. And then you go home, right? You got Philips Hue, and you have all of these other sorts of applications that people understand. The F-Lux, where your device changes color throughout the day, Apple Night Shift, whatever that. And so there's this expectation from people at home that they're going to have this kind of light hygiene. There's manufacturers who are saying we have the goods, right? And then there's this disconnect where we have a very over-conservative or healthily conservative practice that really wants to have IES or AIA tell them it's the right thing to do, and then they'll do it. And so there's this odd thing where the consumers has an expectation, and the manufacturers got everything ready, but how do we make it happen in a way that is thoughtful and appropriate?
Yeah, and I think the other side of this, and the way that I approach it when I talk to clients is, you know, when the question about the science comes up and they say, you know, well, what's the right answer? I say to them, this is a programmable system, right? So we learn today that we think that, you know, this time code for a light bath or a 6500K wash or whatever we want to call it is the right thing. 6 years from now, if we find out in some sort of double-blind study that it's actually 6:30 a.m. to 9:30 a.m., that's a programming shift. That's not pulling gear out of your system. That's not, you know, that's going back in and changing the timing, and that's
right.
easily doable. You know, it's shifting the thought process that lighting has moved to a digital platform that's easily rejiggered, reprogrammed. That's a new paradigm, I think, for a lot of people.
I think that's a really good point, though, too. So we just did a project in Swedish Ballard Behavioral Health Unit. I'm working at another one in Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. And in the specifications, we say in 6 months' time, we're going to come back and reprogram it based upon your experience in that space.
Yeah.
And then we work with the nursing staff, and we say, when are your patients getting up? Do we want sunrise at 6:30 or do we want sunrise at 7? Because that's a variability, and it's not just the physiology. It also, because you have some flexibility in that time frame, but when is it going to help the staff for them to be up and running? So if the staff comes in and does a check on them at 7:30 in the morning, they want them cognizant and participating in their day by 7:30 in the morning. And so they don't want them up at 6. They want them to correlate with their routine check of the patient staff interaction. And it's really, there's not one fits all solution, but it's like any design problem. You need to be quite thoughtful and examine as many criteria as you possibly can to yield the most appropriate solution.
All right, well, guys, I know we're right up against your time limit, so I don't want to keep you any longer than this. But I want to have you guys back on to talk about healthcare specifically, because I think that's a whole much more complicated and really, really interesting set of lighting design challenges. Thank you so much for doing this. And if there's anything, unless there's anything else you guys want to add, I know that you're up against some time stuff.
No, thank you. This is great.
Yeah, we appreciate the opportunity to share something that we actually are quite passionate about.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, guys.
Yeah,
All right. Cheers, guys. Bye,
Thank
Megan.
you.
Thanks, Marty. Bye, guys.
Okay.
That brings us to lighting vitals, that one or two pieces of vital information from the lighting industry you need to know about this go around. Megan, what do you have?
Okay, if I have to pick my top two, one is that the Product Innovation Awards 2016 for architectural products are out in the November issue of Architectural Products magazine. The one specific thing from that is the lighting section, and there are a plethora of lighting products in there, but specifically I spoke with Jake Dyson, who invented one of the Product Innovation Award winners. It's a lighting fixture called the CU beam. And the reason I mention it is because it is the second only lighting fixture that I have ever seen over the last 10 years that addresses both task and ambient lighting in the same fixture. So I feel like this is kind of a breakthrough or a step forward. And Jake Dyson, I was asking about in terms of circadian lighting. I was trying to address that with him, and he's a conservative product inventor and engineer, and he said there's not enough data yet for him to be implementing the circadian lighting, but he subscribes to some research that has been ongoing at UC Davis, University of California, Davis, and also a white paper that is now out or forthcoming from RIBA, the Royal Institute of British Architects, on lighting, best practices in office lighting design. So that I thought was really exciting.
Yeah.
Because it seems like the simplest answer to get the appropriate illumination in space without all of the installation and infrastructure that some lighting installations and some lighting designs require. So yeah, Jake Dyson, it was just launched in Chicago last week, and it is a Product Innovation Awards winner in the office lighting category in the November issue of Architectural Products. So
Awesome.
That's my first Lighting Vital. Second one is a quick note. There's a new pop-up shop that was developed in New York City. It's a new company. It's a multi-resource company called Thrive Global, and it was I guess invented or curated by Ariana Huffington over the last year in response to the steepest decline in workplace productivity since 1969 and the onset of stagnation, and also just overwhelming workplace burnout that people have been reporting and experiencing. So like I said, it's a multi-resource platform, but they have an ergonomic component that addresses the physical aspects of workplace burnout. Their partner in that space is Human Scale. But my point is, I think they should have a lighting partner as well to be able to promote best lighting practices in the workplace as well. And then if I could squeeze in one more thing, this is a general announcement that I think lighting designers should be aware of or will be aware of. But besides the well building standard, which was the impetus for our first conversation about lighting and best practice lighting in the built environment, and then our second conversation with Ed and Marty about circadian lighting, there's a new standard, a new rating standard coming out from the CDC, the Center on Disease Control and Prevention, called the FitWell standard. And it's something that's being released and moderated, I guess, by the Center for Active Design in New York City. Fitwell does address similar things to well, and it does address three components of lighting, but they're a little bit more general. There's the majority of workstations have access to natural light, the majority of workstations have access to views, and the majority of workstations have access to proper shading in order to avoid glare. So I just wanted to put that out there in the general knowledge mailbox.
This is where the industry is going, and I think it's something that if you're a lighting practitioner or if you are in the controls business, if you think about how this stuff actually gets implemented, you have to start thinking this way. Whether we're talking about active shade controls, we're talking about daylight harvesting, we're talking about color tuning and dimming variation in the workplace. All of those things tie together, and it's certainly where we're headed. It's just a matter of sort of getting everybody on board for how to implement and do it in a way that's cost effective. Because I think that's the thing we didn't really talk about with Marty and Ed is that, you know, if at the outset this is going to make people feel like this is more expensive, and how do we address the idea of cost? And I just think that over the life of the installation and the productivity you're going to gain, it just doesn't make a whole lot of, it doesn't make sense not to do it.
Right. The whole idea is increasing the productivity of your biggest investment, which is your human capital.
Right.
And if you look at your lighting not as a capital cost, but as an investment in improving, the overall bottom line, you look at it as a system, then the cost is, non-negligible.
Yeah, and you're also going to have to get into a space, I think, if you're thinking long-term. If you're selling commercial office space, when you're thinking long-term, workers are getting further and further away from the office, right? Like, they're not coming to the office as much. How are you going to make a differentiated appeal and say, no, company X, you really should invest in this and not just let your workers go to a co-working space? If that's the case, then you've got to give feature benefits that prove certain things like productivity. From a worker, why am I going to commute from a suburb to the city to work in an office when I could do the same exact thing at my desk with a window? That's the on the commercial property level, that's the argument that we have to start to make.
But in speaking with architects and designers, actually for this last story that I'm working on for workplace well-being, I said the same thing to Kay Sargent, the head of the workplace at HOK. I said, but people aren't going to the office anymore. So what? Why are we all, about it? And she said it is actually something that they're addressing across any space that could possibly be a workplace, meaning the fourth places, anywhere in hotel or hospitality or conference, convention, co-working spaces, anywhere like that. They're trying to address the lighting quality to guarantee that productivity, even when 1/3 of the workforce is effectively not going to an office.
Right.
Okay, so sorry to go off on that too.
No.
But I know you had some exciting, just emerging business news.
So, industry news this week, we are recording on December 7th. And so by the time this gets aired, it'll probably be out in the ether already. But Leviton has purchased Contec Lighting, which is a huge, huge piece of industry news. Contec is not a small company, based in the Chicagoland area. And Leviton, in what seems to be its slow but steady march toward building a lighting portfolio, has made a huge jump today. Contec, for those who aren't aware, they make downlights, they make track, they make pendants, they make cylinders. Probably best known for their work in the retail, in sort of scale retail environments. But very solid company out of Chicago, very, very well suited to market. The other, or the previous purchase that Leviton made was Intense Lighting, and what we've seen is that in how they treated Intense is still operates more or less on its own, in the sense that they've got their own engineers, their own centers, their own spaces, but they've been infused with the Leviton brand, Leviton Capital, and they've rapidly expanded as a company because of it. I'm very interested to see what this means from an integrated controls standpoint and from an innovation standpoint at Contec, because it's a huge, huge piece of industry news. And I think one could also say secondary fallout from the Acuity Juno, thing.
Yeah.
So that's my piece of news. I'm not sure if we're going to get another episode in between now and the holidays. If we don't, Megan, have a wonderful holiday with your family.
Thank you. You too, JP. And congrats on your new addition. And I hope you guys enjoy the holidays as a cozy unit. Stay inside.
That's the plan. All right, very good. Thanks very much, and thank you for listening.